Hey everyone, welcome back to the Faith at Work podcast, where we talk about what it means for our faith to inform our everyday work. This season, we're talking about the hard realities about work and how we can turn to Jesus to bring healing and transformation into our lives.
A recent survey discovered that 31% of people are afraid of failure. Okay, not afraid of failure in the sense that I am just worried about it, but afraid in the sense that it paralyzes them from actually being able to do the work that they want to do. From speaking up in meetings to perfectionism to procrastination because I can't get started because I'm afraid that if I get started, I'm just not going to do it well. All these different ways and places. So today, we're going to be unpacking why we tend to be afraid of failure, but how the gospel can reframe the way we think about it. I also want to remind you that we're going to be hosting our first question and response episode. This is going to be at the end of this season, and we'd like for you to share any difficult situation that's going on in your work world. So share it. It's going to be anonymous. We're not going to share your name, so it's okay. If you want to submit your situation and your question or anything along those lines, you can email us at faithatwork@ccclife.org. That's faithatwork@ccclife.org. All situations, again, that are shared will be anonymous, and you can share whatever's on your heart and on your mind. And that's about it. So thanks for joining us today, and let's get started.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the Faith at Work podcast. We're so glad that you're here. Larry, Megan, how you guys doing?
Doing well.
Awesome.
Good.
Doing well.
Happy spring. Right? Is it springtime?
I don't know. I feel like it's tricking us out, though, right? It's not always works.
We got about 12 inches of snow coming in.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. It's still March. You never know in the Midwest.
It's true.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this season we've been talking about the heart at work and the complexity of the heart and how our sinfulness and our brokenness shows up at work and how that impacts not only us, but also the other people around us. And we've been taking some scenarios, some situations of true-to-life situations that people experience in the workplace, and then I've been kind of trying to unpack them a little bit further to better understand them. And one of the things that I realized in our last conversation is that there's really kind of three core sections or movements, you could say, that we're actually going to talk about in each of our conversations. So I just want to talk through those because I think it might be helpful as a frame of reference, not only for us, but also for our listeners who are following along.
For sure.
So the first one is heart. So in every episode, we're going to talk about the heart. What's going on in the person? What are they feeling and what are they experiencing? And some of the things that they're dealing with in the situation that we're actually reading and trying to understand those things. Second thing is gospel. So what does Scripture teach us about this emotion, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing? What does Jesus have to say about it? And that's really the heart of what we want to focus our attention on. And then lastly, practice. So what does it look like for us to actually embody the gospel? How do we actually believe that as the true story? And what does it look like for us? So those are the three core movements or things that we're going to talk through in our conversation. Today we're going to talk about a really fun and interesting topic. At least I think so. It's the fear of failure.
So fun.
Yeah. So I figured what we would do, since we're talking about such a light topic, is that we would start with talking about our most embarrassing work story.
Love it.
Which could relate to failure or not. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to go first just to get this over with. And most embarrassing, I think of my time when I was in my dissertation for my doctorate. Okay, so I'm working on it. I've had multiple classes at this point. You're kind of wrapping some stuff up, and there's a research piece due. And I bring this research paper piece into my chair person who is to oversee my process to make sure I'm doing everything on point. And I bring it to her, and she looks at it and she goes through it. It doesn't take her long. And I'm not kidding. She stands up behind her desk. I handed it to her, you're my person. She stands up behind her desk and rips it up. And I was like,
oh man.
And she's like, this is horrible and you failed this. And I was like, what is happening? It was a horrible, embarrassing moment because ultimately what happened was, in good research, what you're supposed to do is you give all of the facts that say why it's good and why it works and why this is a great modality or treatment plan or whatever, but you also have to share its limitations and where it didn't do well or populations you wouldn't use this information with, right? I didn't share any of that. So it was bad research. And so she was like, this can't be trusted. I don't know its limitations. I don't know what you shouldn't use this with, so it can't be trusted. Wow. And that was just a really humbling moment, right?
Yeah.
An embarrassing moment. And I was like, does this mean it's all over?
Yeah.
It wasn't all over. She gave me another chance and I was able to redo it. But still.
But now I bet you never forget the limitations.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I
actually
could start there now, right? I'm like, wait, why will this not work? Okay, this is not going to work because, no, that's where I'm at now.
Yeah.
True.
Wow.
True story.
Mine is much more shallow. No, one of the first things that, I don't know if this is my most, but it was an embarrassing moment. It was many, many years ago. And I was interviewing for a job. I lived in Bloomington and was interviewing for a job at a hospital in Springfield. And I got up early in the morning, got dressed in the dark and kind of, took off and drove down. And as I arrived there, I realized that I had one black shoe and one brown shoe on.
Oh, man.
Were they at least the same style?
They were the same style,
okay.
and they kind of felt the same.
You're trying to make a fashion statement. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm like, hey, I got another pair just like it at home.
Yeah.
But so I'm making this decision in the car. I'm going into the meet with this hospital administrator for first time, first impression kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, do I chance that somebody's going to see that I have two different kinds of shoes on and they're going to go, this guy's, or I realized that in my trunk, I had one of those like earth shoes. You guys probably don't remember those, but
Earth
like
shoes.
shoes. Now
It's made from soil or something. Is that?
No, that's what they call it. But like the gum, the soft soles and just
Sorry,
kind of real casual leather, like you'd wear them with jeans, but
Right.
not
a
with the
suit.
3-piece suit back then, But I went with those because I thought I don't want to change anyhow.
Yeah.
So, it went fine and got the job and
Wow.
whatever. And yeah, I ended up telling him about it. I don't remember if it was at the time like, hey, look at this. But you're walking in and you're just like, I just hope nobody looks at my feet. But that was
pretty hard not to notice.
Kind of embarrassing. But it was nothing like having my paper ripped up. And
Thank you, Larry. It's not as embarrassing as Megan's. Thank you.
Well, maybe mine's in the middle then. I don't know which one. You guys can decide. But I was a golf caddy at a very exclusive golf club. We wore those white like caddy suits.
Oh, wow.
Every time we went out. And there was one member I was caddying for. I'd never caddied for this member before. And people said he was a really great guy. So I was really excited about it. I was like, okay, this is going to be an easy round of golf, whatever. And he has some other guests. And it's primarily a business meeting. So, with those meetings, you kind of let them talk and you just kind of do your thing, right? Anyways, in golf, there's a lot of rules. And you have to pay attention to those rules because, they're just a lot of specific things.
Yep.
And one of them is that your shadow is not supposed to be on the line of someone's putt. And I don't remember what time it was. It had to have been, I don't know, in the afternoon, probably at some point. And the sun was in such a place where that my big shadow was covering someone's line of their putt. And I didn't notice that. And before this guy, was lining up to putt, it's one of his guests. And the member is just like, hey, get out of the way. And I was kind of thrown off by that comment. I was like, I am out of the way. I'm not standing in the, and he was like, no, like your shadow. And you could tell that he was like very upset about it. And I was like, oh, that's right. I'm not supposed to do that. And I'm a relatively new caddy. So, I'm like, oh man, like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm like, man, I should have gotten that. I should have had that. But, and then from like the rest of the round, he just like, didn't talk to me. You could tell that he was like,
how was the tip?
Still upset about it. It just
decent tip.
I don't think there was a tip. I'm just kidding. I don't remember, but
every golfer in the audience right now is going, yeah, man, you don't let your shadow.
No brainer.
Yeah, no brainer. Exactly. Yeah. So,
but like me, you probably have never let that happen again, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I make sure to stand out of the way. But most people I play with don't care. So. Anyways, that's my story. But today we're going to talk about failure. We have a situation. Larry, do you want to get us started through reading it?
Yeah. Well, let me start with this scenario. My name is Jack, and I currently work as an entry-level accountant at a local manufacturing plant. I started this job about a year ago, shortly after I graduated college. But here's the thing. I can't shake the feeling that I don't really belong here. Every day, I feel like I'm one mistake away from being exposed as a fraud. Because of that, I have a tendency to want everything to be absolutely perfect. I'm afraid of making mistakes, especially ones that are noticeable to senior leaders at the company. For example, my manager asked me to start preparing our balance sheet as a part of our year-end tax statements. As I was going through this process, I mostly knew what to do, but I didn't want to ask too many questions. Otherwise, people would think I was incompetent. Shouldn't I know how to do this already? I remember doing some of that last year, but it was such a blur. As I was working on this project for a week or so, I would take my computer home and work late into the evening. Staring at Excel sheets for several hours, I would check my work 3 or 4 times just to make sure everything was accurate. I knew that other people above me would be reviewing my work, but I didn't want them to find any mistakes. After I finished, I sent it off to my manager. A couple of days later, he responded with, "Great work." There were a couple of minor tweaks I needed to make, but otherwise it looks good to me. That wasn't the response I was hoping for, but at least it was good enough. After all the financial reports were finalized, I was in a meeting with our accounting team and some other senior leaders to review the annual performance. At one point, there was a debate about a couple of important numbers in the reports. Since I had combed through so much of the data, I had a couple of ideas, but I was afraid to speak up. What if I'm wrong? What if what I say doesn't make any sense? Then what will they think of me? These are the types of questions that are often in the back of my head. And I've been a Christian for a while now, and I don't understand why I feel so afraid of not being good enough. I know the gospel tells me that I don't need to be enough because Jesus is. But how does that apply to my work? Why am I so afraid of failure? Is this something that is just part of my stage of life or this newish job, or is there more to it?
Excellent scenario. Excellent scenario.
Yeah, Jack. This is very true to life. I think a lot of us are asking these questions at some point in our journey.
Oh, yeah. And I think it comes in waves too, right? There's seasons where we're more, and it's weird because like it could be a season of great strength and confidence, and then on the heels of it, for some reason you're like, I don't know if I can actually do this now. I don't know why. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So going to the heart.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's start with the heart.
Yeah. I think one of the first places that we start is kind of let's define imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it sounds like he's got right here. Right. So one with how we are, how we perceive our person. I mean, that goes to our heart, goes to our core, right? He's clearly feeling inadequate, insufficient. One of the things that defines imposter syndrome too is when other people that are supposed to know you, like you see that they believe in you, but they believe in you on the basis of you also understanding, but you don't really know me. Like there's something in you that's like, I see, Daniel, that you believe in me, but that's because you don't really know what I'm.
See the full self.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we feel like imposters, we feel like we have something to prove, right? But there's actually a good side to being an imposter, in the sense of feeling like an imposter. Could you guys maybe, what do you think about that? Like what might be actually a good thing? Like what's the flip side of the same coin of saying, all right, obviously the bad stuff is there. You got to prove yourself. You feel like you're never enough, blah, blah. But what might be the good side? What do you guys think?
Well, it makes you stay on your toes, right? Sure. Like you gotta, then you're not just overly confident in everything. Yeah. But you're actually you're questioning things. I think which there's like you said, maybe a healthy side to that.
Yeah, it can have that healthy balance.
Yeah, and probably it keeps humility in check.
Yeah,
it's good.
If you're a humble learner and kind of going, I don't know everything and I need to find out. Now, sometimes you might not want other people to know that you're trying to find out. You're doing that because you don't want to look good, but
yeah, exactly.
Keeping you humble.
Yeah, hence Jack staying up for like 4 or 5 hours extra every day trying to look over these Excel sheets or whatever, right? But that's exactly right. So imposter syndrome doesn't necessarily have to be bad, and I think what we need to understand, kind of, Daniel, what you just said, is that we all feel this way at some point in certain places and spaces. And honestly, I think it's kind of wisdom to feel like that. I think it's ignorance to think I've got it all the time, always figured out. No, you really don't. And it's actually really unhealthy to think that you do. So when you feel like you don't, maybe it's not such a bad thing, right? It doesn't have to be in the negative all the time. It can actually be interpreted differently. And so when it comes to our heart, what if we interpreted our feelings of inadequacy not as proof of our diminished value, but as signs or maybe as cues that we need to grow? That this is actually a sign that I need to grow. This is a sign that I need to improve or need to ask others and invite others into what I'm learning and what I'm growing to be and to become and understand, right? What if it could actually be a trigger to, use the word a second ago, but to a confident humility? What if it could be that instead? The idea of confident humility here, right, if we hold that kind of for a second, is that I see where I want to be. I know the goal. I know I can get there. But I also know I don't have what I need maybe just yet. I do need to learn. I do need to grow still, I need to ask others to help me in that, right? Like it's that middle ground, that kind of ideal space of, yeah, I believe in the potential and the possibility of the future, and I know I can be a part of that. However, I also know that I don't necessarily have all the tools in my toolbox just yet to become that guy or that girl. Yeah. And so it's that not a diminished value, just an accurate understanding of my person. So let's live in that space, which is, we'll talk about in a moment, because I want to bring that up in our culture and our space and time today. Not having it all together, though, isn't always, that's not okay, right? Like I think that's where some of the struggle comes in. But this concept of confident humility would help that heart posture change a bit. Yeah.
A thought that might be like on the other side of that, not opposed to that at all, but that thought of a lot of times when we're thinking about ourselves a lot.
Yeah, like I'm always inward turned.
Yeah, humility isn't like thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
And sometimes what would come across as like this is maybe in his case, I'm just thinking about myself a lot. And I love pulling yourself out of scenarios, like that concept of getting on the same side of the table with somebody. It's like, okay, if I can pull myself out of this and look at this and say, well, what in this meeting might I have to be contributing? I have done homework. I can do that. Am I so concerned about me looking bad that I'm holding something back from my employer that they're expecting me to contribute? And I've done my homework. I've done these things. So in some cases, somebody can feel like an imposter, but they can also be like, you know what, Lord, I'm thinking about myself a little too much here.
Yeah.
And I just need to, we'll get to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, though. Of it's a matter of, like you said, like perhaps thinking of yourself less, and it's not about you, so to speak, but about what's actually going on. And I think Jack, in this situation, if he's probably thinking a lot about himself, even in that meeting that he's having, where he's running through all of these questions. It's about him. What if I fail? Or what if it's, it's very inward focused. Yeah. Not about like, oh, what did the information say, and what might it offer these people, or how would it actually benefit the people around me?
Yeah.
So there is that kind of reframe. I think that's really helpful. That might actually lead to that level of confident humility that's really important to have.
Yeah. One of my favorite Christian psychologists, his name's Mark McMinn, and he often says, one of my favorite quotes of his is, to become a healthy human, to become a healthy person, is we've got to move away from a preoccupation with the self. Like we've got to, which is so anti, in many ways, some ways, like just the foundation of secular psychology, right? And so this is why that Christian component must be involved in this, the Christian reality and that truth. We can't have a healthy psychology without it, I don't think, but that's another conversation for another day. But it's moving beyond that preoccupation with the self, and it's holding the self rightly, right? It's understanding our place and space of saying, okay, I have skills and abilities, I have talents, I have gifts the Lord has blessed me with, the intelligence, knowledge, capacity to speak and engage and all this other stuff. However, I also realize that I don't have it all, right? And so hence being made for a relationship as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, and I also empathize with this person though too, like that because, when you're in that moment, it is really easy to have all of those fears and like all of those things kind of swirling around in your mind. And so I think it is really challenging to actually begin to, like, you might, in that moment, you're not usually thinking about, oh, I'm being so selfish, right? You're not,
you don't in that moment.
That's not like your intuitive thought.
Yeah.
But, so slowly, I think over time, having that subtle reframe might help you, maybe make more risks or, jump out on a limb, so to speak, or take more action. Yeah.
And same in that vein, in that moment, in those, we're kind of living off of default, right? Like in those moments, because of, for whatever reason, we're kind of, framed, primed, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, primed to see the world in a certain way based on, I'll say this, kind of how our experiences have been to date. So let me briefly just talk about this for a second. This goes still to the heart. Like, why might Jack be so afraid of being this imposter, right? So there's this imposter syndrome. Maybe there's a reframe that needs to take place, but why is also then there that fear? Like, what's deeper behind? Okay, yeah, I'm feeling this, but what's behind some of this? Two modes that our brain kind of functions functions in is either like discovery mode or defense mode. We're kind of either or in those. And really, we need to hold those together because we want to be whole-brained people. And so it's okay to be both. You can be two things at once. That's good. But typically what happens is we kind of fall into one or the other. So our brain, it's been shaped, it's been refined from a young age to essentially live in one or the other. And we've got to grow and mature to say, okay, we can live in both. We don't have to just say stuck in one or the other, right? So our environment, our messaging, our experiences, it's kind of framed and shaped our brain. So there's two ways. One way is that defense mode. So the behavioral activation system is an option for our brain. And this turns on when we detect opportunities, okay? So there's example I give is there's a school play coming up and a teacher has told this kid when you're a little kid and you're growing up and there's a school play, it's coming up. Your teacher's telling you, hey, you know what, this opportunity is coming up. And this teacher's also been the one that's told you, little Larry, you're also a really good reader and you're a really good leader and you participate and we love what you do in this classroom. And so he's had this really beautiful affirmation built into his life. And so when this opportunity for a school play comes up, the teacher tells him, he's excited. He sees it as potential. It's this discovery opportunity, right? And so he can step into that and he'll maybe take a risk to do it. That's our discover mode. That's that behavioral activation system. Now, the flip side is the behavioral inhibition system. Okay. So in contrast, this turns on when threats are detected. So there's a school play coming up and so on, but little Larry in his class this year, his teacher, no, we're going to get you a shirt that says that actually, Larry, get ready for it.
This is the scenario.
this is real. But this teacher for this Larry has said, you know what? You stumble over your words. Stop trying to read out loud in class. You're just a distraction. The play's coming up. I don't think that's for you, man. Whatever. He has a hope for it. He wants to participate, but his experience to date has kind of formed him to understand if you take a risk, you're going to fail. People are going to put you down. People aren't going to be there for you. They're not going to believe in your capacity to do this, right? And so he learns at a really young age, I'm not going to try and I'm not going to risk because I can't anyway. And so lives kind of in this defensive mode instead of discovery mode because people have constantly kind of blocked that for him, right? So I share all this to share regarding the heart. For those of us who may have been shaped or formed in worlds that chronically undermined our abilities, for those of us who grew up in a fishbowl culture, which I'll say the fishbowl culture is basically millennials and down, okay? Millennials, Gen Z, Gen A now.
And when you say fishbowl,
I mean like social media.
Yeah.
Everything's potentially recorded. Everything can be replayed at any point. I can pull stuff from your past, even if it was 10 years ago. I'm not actually going to let you change and grow. Like that's the and whether that's real or not, right? That's the perceived reality. It's not like everybody knows my business, but for those millennials down who grew up with social media in their back pocket, it does feel like that, which is another conversation, even developmentally, what that does to our brains. Yeah. But this fear of failure now in adulthood, because if we grew up in that world, right, is now going to always be on high alert. Like it's a chronically on high alert because our defend mode is now chronically on high alert. Because many of us learned at a young age, like Jack probably did, like don't risk, don't let people see your weakness, don't fail. If they do, it's forever remembered. There's no redemptive path back. We're not moving forward. Yeah. Don't try and you won't fail. Don't attempt anything and you won't fail. But you also don't succeed. You also don't create or dream or hope when we live like that. You don't bring you to the table. I mean, he already said it. He's like, I'm not speaking up. I'm debating even doing that because I'm afraid. And so you just live a life of fear. Yeah. And so imposter syndrome's here. We got to ask that question, like, why? What else is going on in the heart? And some of this may be what's going on in that heart, which is why we need the gospel. Yeah. And that's why I know where we're headed next.
Yeah. And actually, let's talk about that because I think the gospel has the possibility of retraining us, right?
Yes.
Even if we grew up in defense,
100%.
That defense mindset, right? It can actually change the way that we act and live in the world. So let's maybe talk about that. Let's talk about what does Scripture teach us about this? What does the gospel have to say about this kind of thing that we're talking about?
One verse that comes to my mind. I don't know that this is so much like gospel as the way that we think about it. But 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast your anxiety on me because I care for you, or He cares for you. Cast your cares on me because He care. I care for you. That sense of there's a person there that loves us deeply, accepts us completely, has paid for our sin, and is is ready to take our anxiety and ready to walk with us through anything.
Yeah.
So that risk of being able to, and this is, a concept. I'll probably bring this up many times during this podcast thing, but that sense of spiritual breathing, again, maybe that's point 3. What do you do? But where we exhale, our anxiety and the things that are going through our mind and our preoccupation with self and all of that, and we inhale, God's forgiveness, God's Holy Spirit, and say, Lord, work through me right now in this moment. Do that.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of like when God becomes your father, so to speak, like you actually come to Christ. Like there is this sense in which when he's your father, he's like retraining you in terms of how to actually live and be in the world. And that sense of like you can actually trust this particular person. Like you can cast your anxiety on this person, where before you may never have had that before. You may never have actually been able to trust somebody or been open to somebody of being able to actually do that. But now you actually have, like you said, a person. There's the person of Jesus Christ who cares about you, who knows you, and you are actually able to take those things that you're burdened and concerned about to put them on him. And I think that actually has a really profound impact on who we become.
And presence. We know presence, whether it's human presence, but all the more the presence of Jesus in our lives, like it diminishes anxiety. Presence is an antidote to anxiety. And so the anxiety is essentially the felt lack of presence, the thought of complete abandonment and isolation, and you're the only one, and I don't know if I can make it, and if I don't on my own, I'm ruined, right? But the opposite of that is presence, and this is where Jesus comes into that. Not only Jesus comes into that, and Daniel, I like what you said, like, and Larry as well, like this is the person you can put all of your anxiety on. Not only is he just this person you can do that with and says, I'm going to always forever be here for you in that space because I love you and I am for you. But I also know you totally. So it's not just a person that's human alone, right? That's like, okay, well, yeah, cool, but you still don't know all of me. No. This is the one that says, no, I'm going to be that for you, and I know you. What is it? Isaiah 43, right? It says, this is what the Lord your God says. He says, fear not, for I've redeemed you. I've called you by name, and you are mine. And for those of you who want to read that reference, Isaiah 43, 1, and it's an exclamation point. He's yelling, I've called you by name, and you are mine. To call someone by name back in the time when Old Testament was written, specifically Isaiah, that meant they knew you inside and out. They knew the good, the bad, the ugly. Not just like I know Daniel, but I don't know like every bit about you. I know Larry, but I don't know every bit about you, right? But I'm going to call you by name because that's just what we do in our culture today. To call someone by name then meant I know you. And so this is God declaring over us, I know you and I still call you mine.
Wow. That's really powerful because I think earlier you mentioned when you talked about imposter syndrome, like the foundation of imposter syndrome is the fact that like they don't really know who I am, right? There's something to be discovered.
Yeah.
But once you learn that God actually knows all of who you are, there's nothing left to be discovered. He fully knows you, and yet chooses to love us at the same time, which that's just kind of an interesting connection that I made.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
and
really
that's
cool.
so true.
That's awesome.
So true.
Yeah.
So
cool. Let's talk about a practice. So Larry, you kind of mentioned this earlier. You mentioned something, but let's talk about one thing that Jack could do to actually help believe believe this to really be true. To not just to wishful thinking, but actually, is there something that he can do to put this into practice and really believe the truth of the gospel?
And it sounds like he knows these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So intellectually, he's a believer and he's, active. So he would know these things. But, I think about my life, and maybe you guys are the same. Jack's probably the same. How often do we go through a scenario and all of a sudden we think, I've not prayed about this. I've not even thought about asking God to enter into this situation. Yeah. And that's what spiritual breathing does. When you feel anxiety, that you just, you exhale, that anxiety. Name it. What is this? Ask the Holy Spirit, why might I be feeling this? And exhale that, just like the carbon dioxide. Yeah. Not
monoxide. It's different, but it's both deadly.
Just going out of you.
Yeah.
And then inhaling, God's grace and his goodness and the Holy Spirit and saying, fill me, Lord. And right now, give me that confidence. Help me to know what's true.
Yeah.
And I just have found that in my life to be
It's awesome.
wonderful.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing for me that I would suggest is practicing failure, or like practice one thing that might push you outside of your comfort zone every day, or something to give yourself a goal of saying, I'm actually going to practice failure. Because in this situation, right, like maybe for him, he walks away from this meeting and he says, you know what? The next time I have something to say in a meeting, I think that's worth saying.
Right.
I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. And I'm going to let it be what it is.
See what happens.
And I think even just practicing that forces you to take a step of faith and saying, God, you know what? I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you in this moment. Forces you to actually, to do something.
Yeah.
And I think it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, right? But hopefully slowly over time, as you take more and more of those risks, you're like, oh, okay, like actually God does really have my back and it's going to be okay.
Right.
I'm going to make it. So I think practicing that could be helpful for Jack.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and it's both of you are speaking to things that are physiological, right? Like, so physically calming your body down and training your body that you're going to be okay. Because depending on our past experiences, whether it was simply growing up in fishbowl culture, or maybe he had, like little Larry had a bad teacher, you know what I mean? Whatever it depends on. She was the worst, right?
I'm going to start calling you little Larry.
Yeah.
Today. Yeah.
Whatever it may have been, his physical self has been primed again to not be able to handle well that feeling and that sense of failure. And so the breathing reminds him, one, you're not alone. So there's that presence to calm that anxiety, casting those cares on Jesus. And two, learning, like retraining to live in the new. Daniel, you referenced that earlier. Yes, we're being retrained, reparented in many ways to live in the new, training our bodies to say, no, you actually do this, and you know what? The sun's going to come up tomorrow. It's going to be okay. And even if there's correction is an opportunity to learn, right? And so even in that, there's freedom. And so you actually say it's going to get easier. It does actually physiologically get easier. We know of neuroplasticity, but there's also physiological plasticity. And so our bodies physically can get used to certain things that maybe in the past they weren't. And why, like for those of us who maybe don't do public speaking, the first time you do it, it's kind of nerve-wracking or whatever. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. Your body gets used to that. It remembers it's going to be okay. There's actually a term for it. It's called the inoculation effect. We'll talk about that another time. I have too many words, too much things. But that being said, that's exactly right. And it's learning to live in the new because you can. And practicing as your own awareness of Jesus and his Holy Spirit with you when and before you go into meetings like this or into conversations like this or into places where you're like, it may land, it may not land, is going to help us stay in that space, even in the discomfort, and then in that actually strengthen us and teach us we can do this. We can have these hard moments and make it, and make it well.
Yeah. It's really good. Well, may God give us the grace to help us embody that confident humility. I like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for joining us today on the Faith at Work podcast. If you're interested in learning more about our Faith at Work ministry, please visit ccclife.org/faith at work. And if you haven't already, be sure to like or subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening from and send it to a friend. See you next time.